It began not with a bang, but with a barcode on a refrigerator door. My name is Elias Vance, and for 10 years, my sanctuary was a 3-bedroom colonial on the quiet, manicured loop of Sycamore Bend. The neighborhood was a picture of perfected American stillness, a place where the grass was not merely green, but a uniform, chemically enforced emerald, and the only sound after dusk was the whisper of automatic sprinklers. We lived by the covenant, a leather-bound tome of rules delivered to every homeowner, a document whose weight I never fully appreciated until it turned against the most vulnerable members of my family. My 2 dogs, a gentle, aging Labrador named Bear, and a skittish rescue terrier I called Pip. The first envelope was innocuous, a crisp, white square nestled between bills and catalogs. It wasn't even a fine, but a notice of covenant reminder, informing me that my trash cans, stored at the side of the house and visible from the street for approximately 18 inches of their height, were in violation of Article 12, Section 4. I shrugged it off, moved the cans, and thought nothing of it. That was my first mistake. The HOA, you see, had just launched its new community app, Haven Link. It promised seamless communication and convenient payment portals. In reality, it was a digital panopticon. Residents were encouraged to upload photos of violations, earning compliance points that translated into credit toward their own dues. The neighborhood watch had been gamified, and suspicion became our new currency. The real trouble started a month later. A second envelope arrived, this one possessing a more sinister heft. It was a formal fine, $250. The violation was listed as Article 7, Section 1, Unacceptable Audible Disturbance. The specific disturbance: sustained, high-pitched canine vocalization exceeding permissible decibel levels recorded between the hours of 2:15 p.m. and 2:28 p.m. on the 14th. My blood ran cold. That was the day a delivery truck had backfired directly outside our house. Pip, terrified of loud noises, had barked for a solid 10 minutes as I held her, soothing her. Someone had not only been listening, but had recorded the duration and submitted it as evidence. I attended my first HOA board meeting that week, hoping for reason. The community clubhouse, a building that smelled of lemon-scented polish and old money, was the stage for these proceedings. The board sat at a long table on a raised dais, presided over by its president, a man named Alistair Croft. Croft was a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He spoke in a soft, reasonable tone that made his draconian decrees sound like inevitable logic. When I raised my hand, explaining the circumstances of Pip's barking, he listened with a placid expression. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice silken, "we understand that pets are emotional attachments, but the covenant exists to protect the collective peace and, most importantly, the property values of Sycamore Bend. A neighborhood known for noise is a neighborhood on the decline. The fine stands, and I must remind you, per Article 3, Section 9, repeated violations of a similar nature can be deemed a nuisance, and the board is empowered to take remedial action." The threat was veiled, but it hung in the air, thicker than the lemon polish. I paid the fine, bought Pip a thundershirt, and installed a camera in my own backyard, hoping to gather evidence that she was not a chronic barker. But the HavenLink app continued to ping with anonymous reports. A $100 fine for Bear's water bowl being left on the patio, an unsightly accessory. A $150 fine for the faint sound of a dog whining, captured on a verified audio log from a neighbor's device. I was being targeted. My attempts to find out who was submitting these reports led me down a rabbit hole of whispers and averted gazes. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who loved Bear, confessed in a hushed tone over the fence, "It's the new system, Elias. People are scared. If they don't report others, they fear they'll be reported themselves. It's a sickness." The breaking point came with a letter that wasn't a fine. It was a final notice and order to comply. It stated that my 2 dogs had been officially classified as a chronic nuisance. The board, it declared, was invoking its right to abate the nuisance. The language was cold, bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. I had 30 days to permanently remove my pets from the property, or the HOA would take possession and arrange for their humane relocation. They were threatening to seize and kill my dogs. Panic turned to a cold, sharp fury. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Naomi Reyes who specialized in HOA law. As she dug into the covenant, she uncovered the rot festering beneath Sycamore Bend's pristine surface. The remedial action clause was so broad it was likely unenforceable, but it was designed to terrify homeowners into compliance. More chillingly, she found a pattern. My home was one of 3 on the block that had been hit with a barrage of fines over the last 6 months. All of us owned older homes on larger, more valuable lots. All of us had resisted the board's recent, strong-armed beautification initiative that would have forced us to sell a sliver of our land to the association for a pittance. "It's not about your dogs, Elias," Naomi said, her eyes hard. "It's about your land. Croft and his inner circle have a shell company, Sycamore Legacy Holdings. They've been quietly buying up properties in distress and flipping them. You're being squeezed. They're using the one thing you love to break you, to force a cheap sale." The final board meeting before the 30-day deadline was a showdown. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. I stood before the dais, no longer a supplicant, but an accuser. I laid out the scheme, naming Croft's shell company, citing the targeted harassment. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, but his composure held. He denied everything, of course, calling it a conspiracy theory from a disgruntled owner trying to evade his responsibilities. The other board members, a cadre of sycophants and beneficiaries of the scheme, voted unanimously to uphold the order. My dogs were to be removed. As I left, defeated and numb, Croft leaned close, his breath a whisper in my ear. "A man must know when he's lost, Mr. Vance, for the sake of his family." The following weeks were a blur of legal motions and sleepless nights. The deadline loomed. I was a ghost in my own home, jumping at every sound, watching my dogs sleep and feeling a terror I had never known. The day before, the HOA's thugs, their compliance officers, Wickjude, were scheduled to arrive. I made the most heartbreaking decision of my life. I sent Bear and Pip to live with my brother in another state. It felt like a surrender, a self-inflicted wound to save them from a worse fate. I had lost. Croft had won. The twist, the final gutting revelation, came 2 months later. I was broken, my house on the market, my spirit crushed. I was packing a box in the basement when I found an old, water-stained file left by the previous owner. Inside were minutes from an HOA meeting 2 decades past. And there, in the list of attendees, was a name that stopped my heart. Alistair Croft, then a young new homeowner. But it was the handwritten note scrawled in the margin by the previous owner that made the world tilt on its axis. It read, "Croft distraught. His golden retriever, Duke, hit by a car on Elm. Says the association should have stricter pet containment laws. Vowed to make it his mission." I sank to the floor, the paper trembling in my hand. It wasn't just about the money, the land, the power. It was never just about that. The shocking rules, the threats, the cold, systematic destruction of my peace, it was all born from a single, long-ago tragedy. A man's grief, curdled over decades into a bitter obsession, had been codified into law. He hadn't just been trying to take my property, he had been trying to exorcise his own ghost by taking my family. And, in the end, in the most terrible way possible, he had succeeded. The quiet of Sycamore Bend was now absolute. A silence not of peace but of a victory won in the most intimate and devastating war a person can wage.